Okay, so we're going to, this video is going to be over portrait drawing, but I first want you to think of it as head drawing before we get into the portraits. So you can have all the kind of really nicely drawn eyes and nose and mouth, but if they don't fit within the overall kind of head shape, head size, then the whole portrait is lessened. So really head drawing is what you should be focusing on here. So we're going to start just with head drawing. Okay, so big picture things when I'm thinking about drawing heads are breaking it down into the head into a few different conceptions. So there's the classic kind of like oval egg type shape. That's the one that I think about the most. And then if you think about that surface, you can think about a center line to that. And I like to think, instead of the eye line, as I like to think, have this cross section be the brow ridge here. So if you think about this in 3 dimensions, I can kind of help you. So that means, like, depending on our angle, right, we can say, like, here is a head that's looking down and looking kind of this way, while this one is looking kind of out, straight out, like gazing at us like this. Well, this one's kind of more like this. So, and then let's see, what if we even tipped the head itself kind of onto its side, and we thought more like this. So once you get into more of a profile, the head kind of goes from this shape to the head is deeper, so it kind of turns into more of this shape. In fact, from a profile, it kind of becomes this. There's somewhat of a triangular nature to it, or think of like a guitar pick or something like that. So this is the kind of the thing that I think about the most here. But then there is, so I'm going to try to draw these in these same kind of orientations with the other. So here we have the eraser. So I'm going to use the cube, the box conception here. Alright, so the same idea applies. So head kind of staring off that way. Okay, now down in this one. I don't need to see a ton of the side of the head. So this one's kind of going like this. Now it's important to see these internal lines here, because these kind of cross sections that we're seeing in both of these examples is what's going to carry the structure of the features throughout the whole skull. So in this case, right, so this is matching that, that's matching this is matching this. So the last one that I think about, and I kind of am flipping between these three, is just the cylinder here. And this last one. Like that. So these are the main conceptions that I am thinking about, and what's crucial here is, again, this kind of cross section where we're going to map all our features out. And the reason that these are important is because there are certain things that line up in perspective, as in like our face when we're kind of standing at anatomical position. Our ears, kind of tops of our ears, line up with the brow, the nose lines up with the bottom of the ears. So there's all these kind of connections that happen. But if we think about this as the brow ridge here, and within 3 dimensions, is even as the head is turning, it's not going to line up visually straight across, but it will line up if you snap the head into some sort of 3-dimensional perspective shape, like the cylinder or this egg or the cube. So for instance, the ear can line up here, the bottom of the nose is right there, then it's not, you can't carry that through like this, it's not going to land here. But if you follow that perspective line, then you can find the ear. right? So same thing going this way. As this is turning away from us, the ear is going to show up, maybe, if at all, right around there. So same with this sphere. I think this is another good indication here, is thinking about our brow ridge like this, coming around, that means our ear is going to show up here. If our nose is here, you have to follow this same arc to get onto the side plane and find the bottom of the ear. So snapping it into these 3 dimensions is essential to track things and work with the head in a constructive way, as in building the head on more than just a 2-dimensional basis. So if you are working from a photo reference, then there's a lot of just kind of 2-dimensional triangulating you can get to find these things, but these are nice little quick and helpful ways of tracking, you know, where this ear might land compared to the nose and the eyes and all that sort of thing. So again, these are my main head conceptions that I'm using. Okay, so now that we have those conceptions in mind, let's talk about just the most basic kind of rule that I have. And then with portraits, this is the time that I actually am thinking about. There's just one rule in particular, measurement rule, proportional rule, that I use with portraits. And that is breaking the head down into thirds. So thinking of, maybe that's our hairline. So here's our basic cube for the head, and then let's within that, let's put this egg shape, but putting that egg shape into kind of 3-dimensional space. This is going to come down. Is I'm thinking about, again, finding the center line. Maybe breaking our portrait itself, you can break down into thirds, and that is the most useful measurement for me, and that actually does not include the kind of volume of the hair. But from the hairline down, if you break this space up into thirds, so you have one. Also keep in mind here this, how I have this in perspective. And this is important too, because, you know, finding you can't just break this down into straight lines like this when we're in like a 3/4 portrait or something like that. So all of this has to equate in relation to this kind of idea here, and because we have the top part of this box going down and the bottom part going up, that's telling us our eye level is somewhere in between here. So maybe around here is when things straighten out. but I'm just going to try to break this down into 3 basic semi-equal proportions. Okay, so from hairline down to this one, this is going to be our brow ridge. From our brow ridge down to the bottom of our nose, the base of our nose, and from the base of our nose down to the chin. Okay, so these are the main proportions, and this rule of thirds, this suggestion of thirds in this case, helps us get to a portrait faster. Now, where we find the individual characteristics of our sitter, of our model, comes down a lot to where we find the individual characteristics of our model really comes down to the subtle variations of these proportions. So some people, for instance, have much more space between the bottom of their nose and the chin. So this would then come up a little bit, leaving this space smaller. Some people have more of a forehead, etc. So, but to start with, let's just go into this basic kind of breakdown here. I'm going to bring this in a little bit. Okay, so from here, thinking of this is where we kind of start to break down the head into planes. So thinking about our eye, our brow ridge here, there's kind of this deep cut inward from our brow ridge down to our eye. There's this step kind of inward that's happening here, right? From here down, kind of chunking in. So I'm gonna try to track that on both sides, and then coming out from there, we're gonna get to coming out to our cheekbone here. Cheekbone. You can kind of follow that then down to our chin. Okay. So now we're kind of starting to indicate this side plane. A lot of people think about, our portrait as being, or the head as being kind of this overall circular shape with like a little bit extra down here, and then we kind of shave off parts of the side. So this kind of area here, I'm thinking within this three-dimensional plane, is kind of shaving that little part off. Okay, so then let's come down to this nose. The nose kind of sticks out, right? It's not on the same plane as our cheekbones here. But note already that all of our, from side to side, there's this, the head is like almost entirely bone, right? Like pretty much every part of the head is a bony landmark. The bone, the skull itself is showing through, which means it's all structural. So thinking structurally of these components that can't move, they're locked into this grid, this perspective grid So, you know, this corner of the brow has to line up with this corner of the brow no matter what the tilt is. You know, so if the head tilts one way, then these things have to line up. And this lineup here, because it's snapped into this grid, also has to equate to the lineup of the cheekbones, of the corners of the eye, of the corners of the nose, of the corners of the mouth. So all these things have to relate to each other on this same kind of grid, in this case, in perspective. Okay, so I'm going to add kind of an underplane of the nose here so that you guys can see. Okay, now this is very much like a robot diagram of the figure here, or of a portrait here. But what's important is now you can see this kind of wedge shape of the nose. Our eyes are going to land somewhere in here, and again see how they're following this same kind of perspective logic. There's typically this little kind of keystone of the brow right as it goes into the nose, so there's still a dip in right at the kind of top of our nose. This is the like keystone of our brow ridge. Our kind of inside corners of the eyes typically line up pretty well with the corner of the nose. So I'm following that corner of the nose up, placing that. We can, the other side, other corner of the eye, we could triangulate from, you know, this corner of the nose. Also, just take a shot at this. Now the mouth is within this space. Again, this is all dependent on each individual model that we have. These proportions vary quite a bit, but if we break down this last third that we have here into 3, so we break this down into another group of thirds, our mouth kind of between the lips, the actual mouth lands on this top third, typically, roughly. Another kind of idea is that the corner of the mouth lines up pretty well with the center of the eye. That's again not a set in stone rule, they're just kind of guidelines. Now lips are going to be different from person to person. This bottom third, this last third of our kind of subdivided third, this bottom third, you divide that in 3, and then we have this bottom third. That's where we're going to kind of find this kind of that ball of the chin. Now from there, jaw lines are going to be very different person to person. But again, let's take this, bring it over here, and following this perspective, we can find our bottom of the ear here. the ear typically is kind of sitting on the head at an angle. So if you follow the eyes across now, you will typically find the top of the ear. The widest part of our head is typically right up here. It's not on the face. The actual widest part is on the sides of our head. So just I'm keeping that in mind. Okay, and then it helps me a lot to actually tie in the neck here. So in typical like portrait view, if this is the head, our neck is kind of doing this, and then our rib cage is doing this. This is like super extreme version of this, but you get the idea. So our neck's kind of coming back a little bit, so I'm going to think about the neck because we're in like more of a 3/4 perspective here. It's coming in like this, down, shoulder, and I do think adding, when we're drawing the head, adding this context of the shoulder girdle neck is really important. Something I see people doing a lot in this area is they're extending the neck out too far, because we're thinking of the neck as starting where the clavicular, or where the jugular notch is here, the pit of the neck. However, like visually, the pit of the neck starts deeper than where like the overall kind of mass of the head leaves the shoulders. So the pit of the neck is down here, the neck in some eyes starts up here. But if we kind of tie this down to the jugular notch, right, so this kind of is the length of the neck. So because we're incorporating the three-dimensionality of this figure and then this pose, let's think about the rib cage here. The neck, visually looks this big, but also our brains are telling us that it's this long, and it's because there's this overlap. The neck kind of fits into the shoulder as this cylinder, but the base of the cylinder is tilted at this angle. So visually it will either look like it's this long, or it's going to look like it's this long. And what we typically do is we take this longer side and we push it up here. So now from the back it makes it this long, and that pushes the whole head up, right? So the neck is long, but it's overlapped by our trapezius muscles. Alright, so that's some super basic head structural information. The key parts here are that all of these corners are on the same grid. So corner of the nose, it's on the same angle as the corners of the eyes, as our brow ridge, as our corners of the mouth, as the chin, and then that the ear is communicating to the features within a perspective, within this kind of box or cylindrical perspective. So ear is landing somewhere in there. The other thing I want to note here is just acknowledging these planes. So we have a plane that's facing down, plane that's facing down here. Typically the lips are the upper lip is a downward facing plane. Right underneath the lower lip is a downward facing plane. And then we have, of course, underneath the jaw, this kind of plane underneath the jaw is a downward facing plane. Then we have upward facing planes here, here. The kind of cornerstone of the brow ridge is another downward facing plane. Upward facing plane here. So if we were to kind of draw the planes out, kind of go like this, they drop. There's a lot of substructures happening in the eye, but when we're first mapping in the head, we're thinking more about the eye socket, and then we can get into those substructures. Kind of top plane of the cheeks, then the cheeks drop. If we're here, it's kind of up the nose, down this way, back up, back down, back up, back down, round, depending on our model, what's happening there. So there's also a lot of substructures up here, like our brow ridge kind of crosses like this. Then we have this kind of frontal eminence here also. So there's a lot of substructures, but the key things are these main structures. So there's that little head diagram. So next section, and really, that main head kind of demo or diagram is the key things to focus on. It's really about head drawing that gives you an accurate likeness, not about knowing how to draw an eyeball or how to draw the lips or how to draw the nose. It's about the proportional things. You can actually get a decent likeness by just indicating, having a head here and indicating the appropriate kind of brow ridge to nose to mouth to kind of thickness of our lips to end of the chin. Getting that in the right kind of proportional relationship will give you more of a likeness than over modeling or over rendering or over detailing any part of feature of the face. So this is really what it comes down to. Finding the hairline, finding the top of the head, finding the size of the head, the ears, all of this. That being said, I do want to explain the features very quickly. So all of the features and our head as a whole think of them as having three main planes. So there's a front plane and then two side planes. and there's, you know, with the head as a whole, is two side planes and a front plane. But then you can find a similar thing. Alright, we're going to draw kind of a anatomical-ish head. Okay, brow ridge, chin, sorry, let's redo that. It's not going to give us enough space on the top. Alright, so we're going to say this is our hairline. So brow ridge we're going to put here-ish. And then our nose is going to land somewhere in there, right? So we have our thirds generally mapped out. So let's bring this up. And this is rough. Those proportions don't get super obsessed with them being exactly the same. Again, it's just to get you in the ballpark, at which point then you can start to specify based on your model. So top of the head, we can find that. That has a lot to do with just hair, hairstyles, hair thickness, etc. But this face coming straight down, looking straight at us. Let's start with the forehead here. So the forehead has this front plane and then these side planes. This is kind of that keystone of the nose. So I'm going to just lay in some basic stuff and then we can start talking about it. Okay, another pretty common proportion here is that our eyes are about halfway on our halfway, or the halfway point of the head as a whole, so that includes the hairline. So I'm gonna lift those. Just put a line in to indicate where those will be-ish. Okay. Now, so all of our features, they have a front plane and two side planes. So the nose, if we were to really break this down into another wedge, whatever kind of so there's our front plane here, and it goes down and across. Right, then it's going to hit the side plane here of our cheekbones. So the nose has those planes. It also has an underplane even from the top, from the front perspective. So kind of feeling out the bulbous kind of tip of the nose. That's going to be different for everyone, but for this particular example, okay, so planes, right? Front plane, side plane, top plane, underplane. Making sure, taking care to make sure that the corners of all of our features are lining up. You know, I don't want the nose to kind of be at this angle when everything else is at this angle. So, corner of the mouth, let's put it here-ish. Now the mouth, the lips, again, there's two different structures depending on the lips, but again it falls into three main planes. So our side plane, the lips have more of a pillowy idea here, but there's still a front one and then two sides. So we can think of it as something like this. And then the underside, you know, we can see this plane, or this first pillow, second pillow, third pillow. Bottom lip. Another just hint or thought here with the lips is I'm putting these volumes in so you can see them, but typically when drawing or painting portraits, the less information you put into kind of this border between the kind of the flesh of the lips compared to the flesh of the skin above the lips, or around the lips. They're two different kind of quality of skin, but typically there's not much of a visual event happening there. So I see a lot of people kind of outlining the lips really harshly when that's not really what's visually happening. So bottom lips, again, there's kind of these two side pillows, and then it's almost like the center pillow is less existent. It's kind of just stretched between these two side pillows of the lips. And then the other thing you see a lot is kind of this column that's coming down from the upper lips, or from the lower lips. So, and that kind of depends on the person, but it's this underplane here still. and then it hits kind of the ball of the chin here. Now with the eyes, the same idea is happening. So I'm going to first think about the eyeball. And then I'm going to think about the corner of the eye, so including our tear duct here. And the thing with the eye is you have to think about it, and maybe you guys have seen this diagram before. So this is a sphere with a little, like, I don't know, toothpick going through it. But the eyelid is sitting, you know, it's attached to both ends of this toothpick, and it's draping over our eye. Over our eye in the back around the other side. The other thing with the eyelids are there is a top and bottom plane. There's a thickness to our eyelids that's an important thing to be emphasizing here. Okay, but even within this kind of more spherical idea, is there's still a front, they're still kind of thinking of it as a front plane and two side planes. Getting this shape right is important. It's another place that our brains really quickly think of our eye as this kind of football shape with, you know, this very kind of standard symbolic thought of an eye. But we really have to look at this, the actual shape that's happening here. A lot of times, you know, let's add our tear duct here. Let's add, a lot of times what I see is a much steeper ascent within the inside of the upper lid, and then a slow descent, you know, so side plane, top plane, or front plane, side plane, and then a slower descent on the bottom with a really quick ascent at the far end. So there's kind of this, like, this side peaks right here while this side peaks way over here. So there's this kind of harmonious asymmetry that's happening. The other thing that I've noticed is the corners of the eyes, you know, for this eye, now this corner has to relate to the outside corner on the other side, but it doesn't have to relate to the inside corner of the same eye. So typically there is this little angle, you know, from the inside corner to the outside corner, whether that's up or down or whatever. The eyes aren't straight across like this typically. So this might be kind of up higher like this, and this might be down more like this, right? So there's this kind of cross from corner to corner. Then once you're placing the iris, now again, I think I'm going pretty far into the weeds with this stuff, because I don't think we're going to mainly be focusing on getting good head block ends and good proportional information between the size of the nose to the mouth, to the, just overall feature proportions. But once you get into all of these more intricate details, things you need to think about are, how much of the iris is being overlapped by the upper lid compared to by the lower lid. Getting those things right tell a lot about the kind of the expression. If you're showing the white of the eye on the top, there's typically like a surprise or a shocking kind of expression. If you're showing white of the eye underneath, then that's a whole different expression, right? So there's a lot. The eyes themselves express a lot. So we have to make sure those make sense. The other thing is getting the white of the eyes to make sense. Sometimes they're going to be the same, sometimes they're going to be, much further to one direction or the other, so just making sure all of these things relate within the eye. I guess another thing here, so I'm just double checking the structure of this, because that's the most important part here, is making sure our jawline lines up on both sides, making sure the widest part of our head coming out here are kind of like making sure those things line up. So then thinking about our ears, because we're in mostly an anatomical position, they're going to land somewhere like this. And then, so this is where we find the actual kind of widest part of the head, is once the hair becomes a factor. So again, adding our neck in here. So these inward kind of marks are indicating our sternocleidomastoid muscle. Those kind of cables on the side of our necks, that's connecting to the jugular notch here. Let's see, that jugular notch is close to, I'm not sure what the proportions are, it's all going to depend, but I'm going to say it's probably close to about half. Alright, so these are coming in. Another thing that I notice, so this is just a visual lineup, like I mentioned, people stretching the neck, is I always take an angle from this, corner of the jaw, or this kind of angle here, and it typically lines up pretty well with where the trapezius kind of emanates from. So sternocleidomastoid coming in, trapezius going out, that's giving us kind of the bulk of our neck here. Really looking again at the model and seeing where the trapezius is emanating on both sides and how those are relating, because our shoulder girdle is working independently of our head. This does not have to be on the same grid, right? So depending on what the shoulder is doing, we could easily have this kind of be doing something much more expressive, like that. But typically what I'm looking for to make sure I'm not extending the neck out too much is I'm looking for this kind of a through line from this trapezius over into the other side of the jaw. So I strongly urge you all with those basic ideas and the very first page that I did of the cylinder, the egg, and the cube of the head to just try to find those from the model first. You know, maybe just do a bunch of those and see if you can get that egg shape or whatever it is to feel like it's looking in the same direction as the model, to have that line up with what the model is doing. And then I also urge you to take that same exercise and do this from your head. So that's like drawing from imagination is where you really start to find out where your weaknesses are and find out where you're kind of unclear on information. So just drawing from your head more and more, and then when you kind of start to struggle on knowing what's happening and where this imaginary kind of structure is a good indication of something, an area you should brush up on. But just drawing heads from imagination is really, really helpful for this. Like all of those demos I did were without reference, so they're just from my head. So let's do one here. Okay, so I'm using these indications to help kind of specify this tip. So this is going to be the brow ridge. It's going to drop right about there, which means the other one's going to drop. So all of this comes down to a basic understanding of our planes, the key component. So nose, and chin is going to be there. So sometimes you see this egg shape is enlarged compared to where I'm starting to track or where I'm starting to solidify this information. That's fine. Sometimes the egg shape is just to get you going, just to give you the gesture of the head of what you're looking at. You know, I think I can add a little more distance down here because this is going to be the top of the nose, the bottom of the nose is going to be down here somewhere, which means the real, again, that third, that kind of breakdown of thirds is indicative of where the nose attaches to the face. So it's not the top of the nose, not the ball of the nose. It's actually the base of the nose where the nostrils kind of fit in. So that's going to give us a little bit more space here. And you see how all these are going kind of into perspective. Right, so now we can break this one down. 1, 2, 3-ish. And all we really need to do is indicate maybe a top plane or side planes, especially with the lips. We don't need much more than like that much information. Like that already reads as lips to me. Another thing I see a lot with people's drawings is there's always, typically there's too much of the top of the head, you know, from hairline up, and there's not enough, if you have a head kind of in more of a profile, people cut off this back end of the head. There's a ton of volume on the back. look, I can use the jugular notch as a nice kind of gestural line here. Let's do another one. Let's do one kind of like this. So in this case, let's have him looking up and to the left here. So again, trying to understand these planes. Now with a kind of tilt like this, there's going to be more foreshortening as it goes this way, which means we're going to have the chin and the mouth, there's going to be more room for those than as this kind of recedes in space upwards. We're seeing a lot more of this bottom plane of the nose. Alright, let's do another one that's kind of like loose. So these little drawings, just from imagination, really help you to start to think about the structure and about the planes. You know, you could even do more blown up kind of studies of the features. So I'm going to think about the nose in this one. Be careful not to make the nostrils just black. That's another like quick thought that I see with a lot of people, is they think nostrils, just make them as dark as possible. So when we're finding the shadow shapes of the nose, think about these as spheres and how we can track the shadow shapes. This would be in very much direct light down. So there's the nose, and then it's coming up. We can typically see the actual bone, kind of bridge of the nose bone, wherever that might be. In this case, the nose itself is pretty big, so I would say that's going to be up here somewhere. But then there are these kind of side plane, top plane, side plane, down. Lips, eyes, so you can just do studies of all the features if you want. I think it's just getting a lot of this stuff under your belt and kind of uploading, downloading all of the information, all the different possibilities, what different noses might look like, what different eyes look like, lips, all of that. For example, eyes in kind of portrait are like this. You know, really look for these things. Like a lot of people will think our eyes are pretty much straight up and down. But there is this tilt that's happening. What else? Kind of a face and profile. Let's see if I can get this. A lot of times there is this kind of stair step thing going on. So look for that, especially from the nose down in a kind of a profile. Look for what these angles feel like. Probably the jaw too. So a lot of things, and I will say the more you study the portrait, the more kind of patterns you're going to see like this, but there is also a lot of differences from person to person. So it really comes down to careful observation of your sitter or of your photo reference in relation to or on top of some of these basic ideas of planes and of volumes and of very general proportions. So